Hi everyone, it's Taylor here. Today we're going to create these beautiful wreaths just in time for spring, using one of our previously released stamps along with our new Full of Flowers singles and the coordinating dies. You can see that stamp set here that features 3 different flowers and 2 leaves along with coordinating dies. I'll also be using the clear stamps from the Full of Flowers Cling and Clear set. I have the Pennant Stacklets along with the Farmhouse Wreath and Farmhouse Sentiments and the Playful Plaid background stamp. I'll be using my Sidekick die cut machine and several colors of ink: lime zest, cilantro, peapod, fruit punch, guava, candy corn, peaches and cream, pineapple, sugar cube, Oreo, and sea salt. I will be applying my Bits and Pieces Gold Drip Drops with Tombow Mono Multi Liquid Glue and my Embelly Jelly Pick and Place tool, and I'll be using purple tape and Scotch removable tape along with Glad Press and Seal. I'm starting with the Full of Flowers singles stamp set with the coordinating dies. Those stamps match the background stamp Full of Flowers Cling and Clear, so I'll be using just the clear stamps to fill the images from the Full of Flowers singles set for these cards. I'm going to start by die cutting several of these dies using just sugar cube cardstock. We're going to set up the negative to make mass producing these much easier. So I'm taking some scraps of sugar cube and using my Sidekick machine to just cut these out of plain sugar cube cardstock. After cutting several, then we will go ahead and set these up in the MISTI, like I said, for quick mass production. In addition to the multiple sugar cube die cuts, you'll also need a negative die cut of each of the images. So I'm setting my stamps up in the MISTI far enough apart so that I can arrange the negative around the outside. I'm going to stamp these in Oreo ink onto my grid paper and then take those negative die cut pieces and place them around the outside of each of the images. That's how I know that when I put my die cut pieces right back into place, like I'm putting a puzzle together, then when I ink my stamp and close the lid, it's going to go in exactly the right spot every time. So here I have arranged my first layer and I'm placing that with Oreo ink down over the top of the stamp. You can stamp more than once if you want a really crisp black, and you can see all 5 of those pieces then. I've done this multiple times using my die pick to easily pick out the stamped pieces when I'm finished. Now I have a whole pile of stamped images and I can ink them up. I'm starting with Peaches and Cream and Candy Corn ink for the tulip looking flower and using the clear stamps from the Cling and Clear to fill these with different colors. Next, I'm using the Guava and Fruit Punch to give it a little bit of added dimension on the rose flower. Next, I'll use Potato Chip and Pineapple. I was trying to get extra dimension on this one, but really it ended up being easier to just use the pineapple, so I switched to only using pineapple for the daisy looking flower. Now we have the leaves with Peapod and Cilantro. I varied what I was using. I also added in some lime zest just to give the leaves a little bit different color. When we are ready to put this wreath together, it will be nice to have different leaf colors for some varying dimension throughout the background of that wreath. So I'm just going to finish these up doing a little bit of a rock and roll technique to get a dual color on some of these leaves. But there is a leaf clear stamp for every size leaf in the different images of the single set. So there's a really tiny one here that I'll use first on the roses and then a separate one for the small daisy flower as well. It's also good to note that the clear stamps were not designed to fill the space perfectly. They're meant to be more imperfect, so there's less pressure when you're stamping. Next, I have 2 top folding sugar cube card bases, and I'm going to use the partial die cutting technique and the Pennant Stacklets to cut a V into the front of the card base. Now I have cut my card bases just slightly smaller than 4 1/4 so that this die fits perfectly top to bottom and doesn't cut off the sides of my card at all. And I'm arranging that die so that the second cutting plate is only over the top portion of my card base and only cuts the V off of the bottom. Next, I'm going to bring in the Farmhouse Wreath clear stamp set, and we're going to stamp that on the front of each of the card bases using Peapod ink. I've centered the wreath on the card front panel and made sure the open part with no leaves is at the top where I plan to add the single flower images in a little bit. Next, I'm going to stamp the front of the card panel with a background stamp called Playful Plaid. I could have done this step before, but it doesn't matter either way because I'm using sea salt ink, which is so light that it doesn't disturb the Peapod that we've already stamped. So you can see it creates an almost watermark type look on the front of that card base, giving it just a little bit of added texture and dimension. You can also see that I used purple tape at the top to mask off the fold of the card so that the background stamp didn't get on the back of my card panel. Now it's time to arrange the flowers from the Full of Flowers singles set. I'm taking different flowers and leaves, placing them over that wreath and using that as a guide to keep the circular image intact. Now, once I have all of the flowers and leaves in place, I'm using a piece of press and seal to keep the arrangement together so that I can lift it up and add the foam tape underneath. This is a trick that my friend Lori Willison came up with years and years ago, and I don't know about you guys, but for me, the press and seal now lives permanently in my craft room. So now that I have both arrangements finished, I am choosing a couple different sentiments. I decided on Thanks a Bunch from the Full of Flowers singles stamp set, stamping that in Oreo ink into the center of the wreath. And then I'm grabbing a clear stamp set, the Farmhouse Sentiments that go with the Farmhouse Wreath that we used, and I've stamped Joy in the center of the other wreath. Now for my last step, I've taken a piece of toffee cardstock and I'm going to stamp that Playful Plaid again with sugar cube ink. Then I'm going to cut apart the piece so that I have two pieces that I can adhere to the inside of my card, and then you can see the V that we cut in the front of the card even better. It really just sets it off and it adds to the Playful Plaid that we stamped on the front of the card. I wanted to be able to arrange exactly where I wanted my Playful Plaid to hit, so that's why I overlapped the base of the card a little bit and ended up trimming it off with scissors. Of course, you could set it up to not have to trim, but I wanted to choose exactly where I wanted that background to fall. Now to finish it off, I have my Tombow Mono Multi, and I'm placing my gold drip drops down with the Embelly Jelly Pick and Place tool. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. You can find all of these products at the Tailored Expressions web store at tailoredexpressions.com.